I'm John Zock, and the builder of this HO scale Sierra Railroad. My version of this railroad got started in 1992. As I said, it's HO scale. It runs from Oakdale to Tuolumne. The real railroad was 57 miles long. This model is 10 scale miles long. It's loosely based on this Sierra. All the towns are in the right place, but I've added additional industries, etc. I'm really into operations, and that was done to create more operations. On every other Thursday night, we have 12 to 14 people come and operate the railroad for 3 to 4 hours, and that's where I get the most enjoyment, in addition to building and working on the models and the track and the cars. The Sierra number 3 is backed out of the roundhouse on the turntable. It's getting ready to run out over to the depot and to take the morning passenger train up to Tuolumne. As we back off the turntable, we'll stop and get some water, then proceed over to the depot to pick up 2 passenger cars. So as the passenger train runs by Limekilm, Limekilm was the main producer of lime. It shipped cars out all over California. In the 50s, they were being shipped out in boxcars and covered hoppers. As the passenger train arrives in Sonora, it runs past the Standard Oil Depot into the station. Across from the station is the old hospital. Passenger train will stop at the station. There's a scheduled meet with the Hill Job Extra with the 28. It'll be arriving shortly after the passenger train arrives at the depot. The Hill Job Extra, being pulled by the Sierra 28, is crossing Sullivan Creek Trestle on its way from the mill at Fazlur to Sonora. As passenger 3 runs through the mill at Fazlur, it's at restricted speed. It curves around the mill, heads towards the engine house of the Pickering, where the Pickering stores their Heislers and Shays. The Pickering and Sierra shares trackage from this point east up to Ralph. The train approaches Standard, the company town of Pickering. There's the depot built by the lumber company, and also there's a small yard for some of their empty log cars. As the train passes over the Draper Trestle, it's transitioning onto the third level. As it approaches the Black Oak Trestle, the train has just passed the siding at Black Oak. Sara Passenger 3 is running through Ralph. Later in the day, the Pickering log train, the load of logs will come down out of the mountains and head on down to the Fazlur Mill. Sara Passenger engine number 3 arriving in Tuolumne. It will run across the face of the Y and then back into the depot at Tuolumne. The buildings are mostly from the Westside Lumber Company. They're mills and warehouses. The little Heisler number 2 is the local switcher that moves the freight cars around within the yard. In Oakdale, the S-12 diesels that are brand new to the railroad in 1955 are in the engine house. They'll be coming out, running down east, and then backing up to the cut of cars on the yard track. It will then proceed east up the hill all the way to Jamestown. Hatless Rock is about 3 miles east of Oakdale. It was the primary source for the rock that was used to build the Tri-Dam projects, Don Pedro, and the other dams up the hill. The Atlas train will run out to Paul Cell, and at a later time, the cars will be picked up one of the Sara mainline freights and hauled all the way up to Hetch Hetchy. As the rock train departs from Hatless Rock, it will cross over Highway 108 on its way to Paul Cell. In the background, you might see the Sara train running through, and again, they will meet at Paul Cell. The rock train will drop off its hoppers and return to Atlas. As the train approaches Warnerville, it will pass the water tank that was made famous in the movie High Noon as it continues on its way to Cooperstown. Cooperstown was the starting point of the grade up the hill through Hetch Hetchy all the way into Jamestown. And where needed, a helper would come down from Hetch Hetchy to help haul the rock trains up for the dam projects at Hetch Hetchy and further up the road. At Hetch Hetchy Junction, the Hetch Hetchy train from Groveland will be arriving shortly. It will stop short of the Sara main line. The Sara train will pass through, and once it's out of town, the Hetch Hetchy will continue doing local work in the Hetch Hetchy Junction area. The Sara freight train has cut off some cars at Hetch Hetchy and will proceed up the hill through Keystone and Chinese. As they leave, the Hetch Hetchy train will come back, basically interchanging their cars they brought down from Groveland, dropping those off and picking up the cut that has just been dropped off by the Sierra train. As the Sierra freight climbs out of the canyon, it arrives at Keystone. I've added additional industries here to freelance, giving me more operations, the cattle pens and the railroad ties. As it runs through Keystone, it enters into the Red Hills area of Tuolumne County. The Chinese mill, Snyder Mill, was originally put online in about 1955. It's still running. It's now owned by SPI, as is the one in Fazlur. Both mills are still producing lumber and loads for the Sierra Railroad.
The train is now passing through what I call Hatless Rock. If you ride the excursion train out of Railtown in 1897 today, this is where your locomotive will run around your train to its return trip to Jamestown.
The building is fiction. There was no building that looked like that, but again, it was added to create more additional operational opportunities. Sierra freight being hauled by the diesels are entering Jamestown. It'll run past the 28 as it's coming down the hill from Sonora. There'll be some local work done. The 28 will be cut off and sent to the roundhouse. The 38 will couple up to its train and head out of town after the diesels have arrived. As the 38 is leaving Jamestown, you'll notice that it's running tender first. The reason for that is the engine was too long to fit on the turntable in Jamestown. It will proceed on down to Cooperstown, where it will return on the Y at Cooperstown before heading into Oakdale. The Angels Branch Melones train is ready to depart Melones. It's headed into Jamestown. Although the track on the prototype was pulled up in the 30s, they rediscovered a gold deposit, relayed the track, and the branch is now active once again, only into Melones. As we saw earlier, the Atlas diesels brought the rock cars out from Hatless Rock out to Paul Cell. They have now been picked up by the Sara number 34, which followed the diesels earlier in the day up through Cooperstown. Now that it's arrived at Cooperstown, it needs a helper from the Hetch Hetchy engine number 5 to get the cars up the hill to Hetch Hetchy. Now that we've looked at the Sierra operations, we're going to take a look at the Pickering Lumber Company. The Pickering Lumber Company ran from Fazlur to the mill all the way to Ralph, where it took off from the railroad, the Sierra Railroad, out to the woods at Soap Creek. It was one of the major sources of revenue and freight traffic for the Sierra Railroad. The Pickering log train has been made up in Soap Creek. It has 16 loaded log cars and 2 shays. They'll run all the way over to Shotgun. On the way, they'll run over the Chinaman Creek Trestle, over the Beardsley Bridge, over the Stanislaus, and then up through the Peeled Onion. Once arriving at Shotgun Pass, they'll exchange their loads for empties.
The train is approaching Chinaman Creek Trestle. The trestle was scratch built from photos and is about 90% of full prototype size.
And again, you can see there's 2 engines separated by the loaded log cars. The rate restriction on the trestle required no 2 engines on the trestle at the same time. Once off the Chinaman Creek Trestle, the next bridge approaching is the bridge over the Stanislaus River.
In a few years, this will all be underwater as they build the Beardsley Dam.
But for now, the trains run across the bridge all the way up to Peeled Onion. Peeled Onion cost in the 1920s over $1 million to cut the shelf for the roadbed. It's still in existence, and almost every time the train ran, they had to have at least 2 engines pulling the trains up out of the canyon up to Shotgun. As the log train approaches Shotgun, it will have a meet with the Pickering number 1, which will be coming up out of the mill at Fazlur. This room is 8 by 50. It's basically the size of a 50-foot boxcar. So the log train has come to a stop. The mill train has come up from Fazlur with 8 empties. The empties will be exchanged for loads, and as the 3-truck highest load number 1 leaves, it will be taking down 8 loaded cars to the mill at Fazlur. As the number 1 proceeds downhill, it runs through Ralph, where it joins the Sierra mainline. Pickering had joint trackage rights with the Sierra from Ralph all the way down to the mill at Fazlur. As it leaves Ralph, it crosses the Black Oak Trestle and through the Black Oak area where they have the ore gravel dump site. the number 1 Pickering engine with its 8 loaded log cars continue on down the hill. It will now run through Standard, a company town owned by Pickering, past the freight house, proceeding into Fazlur, the mill, where it will drop off its 8 loads and eventually later in the day take 8 empties back up to Shotgun. And finally, a short look at the Westside Lumber Company activities in Tuolumne. Westside was another major source of revenue and freight traffic for the Sierra. It would log the Clavey River Valley and bring the logs down to the mill in Tuolumne, where it was finished and loaded onto standard gauge cars shipped out by the Sierra Railroad. Westside number 7 has come down from the Camp 24 with a work train. It will proceed down further into the yard, we'll cut off, and then we'll back up along the freight house along with the number 8 to get turned on its Y. Well, thank you for coming and visiting the layout. It's been a work of love since, as I said earlier, from 1992 to now. The construction phase is completed, but obviously we need a lot more scenery work. But again, we operate every 2 weeks, so between operations and other commitments, the scenery is a little bit longer in length and time frames than I had hoped. But we all enjoy running the trains, and that's the most enjoyable part for me, is running the trains and seeing the enjoyment other people have in running during an operating session. So again, thank you for coming.